on this computer. Let me see.
Oh, I need to...
Okay. All right, everybody knows me. My name is Malone. I'm the creative coordinator of the Mollies Masquerade. I'm also theatre director for Headsbodies Legs Theatre Company, and we're working with in partnership with St Margaret's House to deliver this heritage lottery project about the history of Mollies and the Molly houses. Today we're talking to Lu Firth, who's going to be running the costume workshops in January for the Mollies Masquerade. I know Lu because we worked together on The Tempest for Sea Change Theatre Company, and we took a production to Lesbos in Greece and performed at a women's festival as a promenade. And Lu is an amazing costume designer. So Lu, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi Ray. Yeah, as Ray said, Ray and I know each other because of working on numerous productions of The Tempest in Greece and London and other places, and including the Elfest. And I've worked in theatre mainly in costume for on and off with lots of different small theatre companies over 30 years. But primarily I've been involved or worked and employed in working with street homeless and mental health, and I still work in that kind of field. And I also teach basic textiles in the community. I'm also sort of qualified from degree in MA in theatre design and textiles, and an MA researching historical dress. And it's from that's why I'm really interested in working in this project with St Margaret's House, because of the historical side of it, but also because it's about our queer history, and it bringing up lots of different questions. As I was saying to Ray earlier, that's what I'm really fascinated about. Although it's the questions, and the more reading I'm doing, I'm like, well, trying to question it, but then it's sort of bound up. You know, it's so political because you know, our queer history, our women's history, and our Black history is, you know, so much of it is lost, or it's never been stored because it was never seen as important. And what we find, similarly with the others, but also with the Mollies, is that the evidence that we have is all through criminal records. And again, you know, sorry, it's hard that, you know, our histories are defined by that. You know, we're not all criminals, but anyway, just reading through my notes, I've noted down as why I'm interested in this, and the sort of the beginning of this project for me is saying that, you know, so the Molly Masquerade project is hosted by St Margaret's, which itself is situated in an 18th century Georgian townhouse built in 1724. And it stands near where some of the original Molly houses were. I mean, it's believed that there was one up in Whitechapel, which either it's where one of the banks is, or it's actually very close to the Salvation Army Women's Hostel that I know from, because I used to work in the area 30 odd years ago with street homeless. So I know the area very well. And again, that's another of my interests to come and work with this project. But going back to the area, so 18th century Whitechapel and Bethnal Green are good examples of how London was then and how we know it today, in it being a rich multinational cultural and ethnic mixed society. And particularly in the East End, there would have been a large Black, African and Caribbean community. And it's believed that the Black community in London, there were at least 10,000 people living here, and a further 5,000 members of our Black community, you know, across the rest of England. And those would obviously would be in ports like Liverpool or Bristol or possibly even Plymouth. So even at the height of the abolition movement, it would have been common to see young African men and women being sold for domestic service in the coffee houses and quayside auctions of 18th century East London. So going back to thinking of, you know, Whitechapel and Bethnal Green, you know, we've got the docks just down the road, although at the moment we can hardly see them because of all the fancy building work going on and expensive flats. but you know, we do have the East End docks. So for the Mollies, they would have seen their black brothers and sisters appear on the docks and then being sold as slaves or as domestic servants or whatever. So, you know, this was, you know, this was also their community. And with this, I would also question, and I would hope that perhaps some of the Mollies were African and Caribbean slaves.
We've spoken a little bit about, in Alex's Zoom with the Hogarth paintings, that there's a certain amount of visibility of black characters within the Hogarth paintings as well. And I noticed as well from your research, there was this quote about how black communities were very integrated in low society, so much so that in 1768, the magistrate Sir John Fielding complained that black slaves in Britain who ran away from their owners were difficult to recapture since they gained the sympathy and protection of London's mob, which I thought was really interesting. It also ties together in Dander the Mop's discussion about Polari, this relationship between the criminal underclass and the Mollies. But then also it is, like you say, interesting to think that the Mollies may have been like a multiracial, multi-ethnic community as well. So if we move on to talk a bit about the costume design, so I'm going to try and share your PowerPoint. Let's see if I can do this. Oh no, hang on. Excuse me, technical present. There we go. Let's see. And then I go to Zoom.
Really powerful what you said, Lou, about being known through criminal records. I've never heard that, and it's just potent and painful.
Yeah.
So is everybody see the screen? Should say Mollies Masquerade. Okay, so here we go. The first image that I think you can see, which is like our most famous image, I think, that we've got of Mollies, or one of the few images we've got of Mollies. Have you got anything to add?
Oh, me, sorry.
Yeah, Lou.
Yeah, this is the tip. This image is used a lot. You'll see it then with any kind of referencing to the Mollies. So it's two figures, you know, in a bedroom, you know, getting dressed in differently gendered clothing. Obviously, the male figure here is wearing a very over the top feminine wig covered in bows, and then the other one is wearing a very male, well, it was male dress, the tricorn hat, which was very common throughout the 18th century, and probably sort of like an Indian print skirt, or I don't know. Yeah,
good. Yeah, it's difficult to find any images, but this is like the one image that we have with the dressing. Let's see if I can go to the next one. Oh, have I missed one? There, the coffee house mob.
I included this because it's, to me, it looks, I imagine, a sort of typical image of a coffee house, and you can see at the back, you know, a bit like a stage area, you know, there's a woman behind the bar serving coffee, and it's quite funny, there's a guy throwing coffee over somebody at the front, and they're there with their long jackets nearly reaching their breeches and tight leggings and tricorn hats and wigs. Yeah.
Good. Next one.
This is really interesting. So this is by Josiah Wedgwood, who you all know, well, I presume, from all the wonderful ceramics. And I've just lost my notes, just to sort of, I'll read you something, because anyway, so these were medallions that he made, and they were titled "I'm Not a Man but a Brother," made in 1787. And so Wedgwood had a close friend, Thomas Clarkson, who's an abolitionist campaigner and the first historian of the British abolitionist movement. And that aroused Wedgwood's interest. And so he made these. And they were widely produced on domestic objects like crockery, and also became a popular fashion accessory. And people wore them pinned to their clothes, or they'd have them on their snuff boxes, or pinned in their hair. So I just thought this was really interesting. And it reminds me of you know, I don't know, in the 70s and 80s, or even now, so, you know, political badges that we might wear, you know, like Rock Against Racism or Pride badges or whatever. And there's a few more examples of badges I want to mention at the end of this talk.
Yeah, it's really interesting, that like little political sloganing. It's quite a contemporary thing, and actually, yeah. I'll try and go to the next one.
Talking about the criminalisation of mollies. So if you don't know, you know, it was illegal for men to have sex with each other, and they were either executed at Tyburn, or incarcerated, or put on the pillory, where local people would come and throw old food and God knows what at them, and they would be kept there for days or hours. So you see on these inscriptions here, it says flog him, here's a fair mark, cut it off, you know. So it would have been pretty awful to, you know, to be on a pillory. I mean, really, really degrading. And you probably have, you could have up to a few hundred people coming to abuse you publicly.
Yeah, often that I've read about that as well, that they were really popular events. So that they had raked seating because they were so busy, and they became place of, it was almost like a festival. People used to go and watch people be hung.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say the executions were incredibly popular. Yeah, it's like people going to open air theatre. Yeah, well, which it was to them. Yeah. This is lovely. If you don't know, this is Thomas Rowlandson, who was a printmaker of the time, and particularly of sort of working class people. A lot of it's quite caricaturish and sort of taking the P out of it, of people. But this is Rosemary Lane Rag Market, and Rosemary Lane is near Cable Street, sort of, by Whitechapel, and Rosemary Lane was one of many second-hand clothes markets in the area, so in the 18th century, sorry, I'm not reading my notes. In the 18th century, particularly the poorer working class people, you know, survived off second-hand and third-hand clothing. A lot of it was handmade, but also for the richer, there would have been dressmakers who they could have gone to have their clothing made for them. Shops came in much later, but there were second-hand shops. There were also pawn shops, and the pawn shops sold a lot of clothing. It wasn't just expensive watches and clocks and so on. And a lot of clothing was stolen or pickpocketed, and that would have obviously been found on these second-hand clothes markets. And one of the main pieces of clothing to be stolen were handkerchiefs, which I presume was because they were quite easy to whip out of people's pockets. But it's just interesting that such a small, I don't know, not that important piece of dress was stolen, but some of them would have been made out of silk.
Yeah, it's also, that's a little bit covered in Mark Ravenhill's play, That's Molly House. Kind of starts off with them being like getting a hoard of dresses. So yeah, I'll go to the next one. So should we talk a bit about like what were the defining features of the costume of the period?
Yeah, so I'll read you out something, but there's a number of slides here of the male fashions and women's fashions, and I've used these to give you, rather than, I mean, I've got some paintings later, but I chose these to hopefully give you a kind of clearer idea, because we're talking about a long period. We're talking about 120 years of how the cut of dress changes through that period of time. So for the men, like in most other centuries, the ensemble is sort of jacket, breeches and waistcoat and shirt, and this is similar to like the 1700s and the whole of the 18th century. The coat, waistcoat and breeches could be the same color, or they could be of different colors or different fabrics, or sometimes a waistcoat could be quite heavily embroidered. Here you've got lots of detail more going up the front of this coat. But if we go on to the next slide. And as you can see here, that they would wear linen shirts with frills and linen underdrawers, which would have been quite long. And the lower part of the men's legs were very, very important. And you will see this later on with the Macaronis. But this was sort of the sort of defining part of their kind of silhouette and the look of their dress, and what kind of symbolized the sort of look of elegance, really, for them. They would wear silk stockings and leather shoes with stacked heels, either low or medium height. And the whole ensemble would have been topped by a shoulder-length, full-bottomed wig and a tricorn, which is three-cornered, hat with an upturned brim, as he's holding there. As the century progressed, the male silhouette slowly changed, but only slightly. And the male silhouette continues to become more exaggerated, with tighter fitting breeches and coats. The Macaronis were believed to wear corsets to emphasize their figures. By the middle of the century, the wig was usually tied back, known as a tie or bag wig, so into like a ponytail. And again, the Macaronis wore this a lot. But by 1800, the wig was only worn for the most formal of occasions. Coat skirts by, you know, the sort of the hem, the length of the coat, gradually became less full, and the front was cut in a curved line towards the back, and the waistcoats became shorter. I mean, here the waistcoat is still fairly long, although it's shorter. I mean, at the beginning of 1700, the waistcoat and jacket were near enough the same length, meeting the breeches. The upper leg began to show more, and by the end of the century, breeches fitted better because they were made of knitted silk. And this is a typical silhouette of the Macaronis, as I've already said. Just to let you know, the Macaronis were a group of mostly gay men, I'm sure some bisexual, and those sleeping with women, but they were effeminate men who presumably, and we have some evidence, had relationships with men, and they were sort of the latter part of the century, and they were mainly from middle and upper class and aristocratic families, and they were very, very stylish in their dress. I mean, they had the money to afford it, and they were very much into the arts and beauty, and they'd all been on the grand tours, you know, when the rich travelled around the continent and went to Italy and so on, and looked up on the history of art. And yeah, so so this sort of elegant style of dress was very much part of their lives, but also with their financial capabilities, really.
Shall I go?
Do you want to go on with the slides?
Yeah.
So yeah, you can see that the waistcoat has become shorter, and then it gets slightly shorter. So there's not a huge amount of difference. There you go. So it's now veering up towards their chest, and the trousers are much tighter. The jacket's much tighter. It's a lot more elegant. Not that the others weren't, but can you see what I mean? It's a much linear look.
There's another one.
And this one, which is beautifully embroidered all the way up in a stand-up collar.
This guy?
I included this young man. He was 21 when it was painted. I just thought, although supposedly he was straight, I just thought maybe he was quite gay.
From his stance.
Twinkle in his eye. Sorry?
Just from his stance, just from the way he's looking at us.
It's just a look on his face. Well, he's got like a sort of twinkle in his eye.
Macaroni.
So there's a Macaroni. Yeah, with really, really stylized hair, ridiculous pigtail at the back. I mean, obviously it's not quite true. Very thin, elegant legs, lovely pom-pom sort of rosettes at the end of his breeches. And then he's got, the words, I've missed the word. The bouquets of flowers that they wore here. It's so typical of the 18th century. Sorry, it'll come to me. So he's wearing that. Yeah.
That's a big
And
bouquet as well. That's like a bunch of flowers on
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Nosegay is what they're called.
It's called what?
Nosegay.
Nosegay. Oh.
Yeah, yeah.
They smell nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure, you know, if you, well, you know, as we've all read, you know, the baths were lacking there. You know, you can imagine all these powdered wigs, they would have got all kinds of stuff caught in them. And the washing of clothes, I think you needed nosegays. So yeah.
Great.
And he, yeah, he's got a ruffled shirt on. Yeah.
He's got a ruffle. Yeah, he has.
Yeah, here. Yeah.
Ruffle. And a very little hat at the top of his massive wig. Yeah. Love it.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a print by Hogarth, as you can see, in 1746. And it's titled Taste in High Life. And it focuses on the figure of a fashionable effeminate man in order to make its point, playing around with the suggestion of homosexuality without directly referencing it. The gentleman on the right is again dressed in exaggerated style, as I've been talking about, and the feminine nature with slender physique and bourbon clothing juxtaposed with the phallic symbolism of his hair and cane. And he's conversing with a woman who, while equally overdressed, the woman in the middle, is shown as old and ugly. It's suggested that his only interest in women is for conversation and fashionable society and not for sex. Hogarth was well known for his sophisticated visual codes and has given the viewer a clue into this man's sexual identity through his accessories. For example, he holds a fur muff, pun definitely intended, in front of his crotch, which suggests that his true gender ought to be female, but at the same time his hand penetrates the muff, suggesting heterosexual interest. Under his arm he holds a large black tricorn hat, the shape of which also resembles the female pudenda. So much so, in fact, that the phrase old hat was common slang for female genitals. So Hogarth is hinting at the fluid identity here rather than a straightforward binary of male and female or straight and gay.
Fascinating. Old hat. Yeah. Horrible.
Yeah.
Are they also gossiping? Are they gossiping?
They do.
They do, don't they?
Yeah.
Can I just ask what's going on in the picture behind as well? Because it looks like there's something interesting going on there.
I can't see really for the quality of
the picture on the wall, or you mean the other woman?
Yeah. No, the on the wall, yes.
I'm not sure.
Because there seems to be a whole lot of stuff going on there.
I think like
it looks like naked statue.
Well, that's what I noticed.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. With half a skirt.
And cherubs and
yeah.
It might be like sometimes there's like classical references or biblical references. I think we could do a whole talk just about Hogarth himself and everything that you can pick up from the Hogarth paintings and all the details in the background. I'll go to the next slide. So women.
Okay. So this is what was known as a mantua dress, and was very common. The mantua replaced a stiff, constricting bone bodice and skirt of the 1600s. It was of a more loosely draped style of gown and was thought to display silk designs at their best advantage. So silk design, you know, the woven silk cloth. As they were draped rather than cut. And as such, it's believed that the garment was named after Mantua in Italy, where expensive silks were produced, or possibly derived from manteau, which is a French term for a coat. The mantua was a coat-like construction with sleeves cut in one piece with the back and front. It was pleated. Do you want to do the second slide? Yeah. All right. Yeah. So it was pleated at the shoulders and fell to waist, where it was held in place by a sash. From there, it was folded back into bustle shape and worn over a matching petticoat. And just to say, you know, the bustle and all the pleating in the back, again, is to emphasize the sort of feminine figure, you know, her art, basically. I mean, you've got bustles, you know, later on, a few hundred or so years later. But that's the whole point of it. It's about emphasizing the figure. As the style evolved, the pleats at the front were reduced in number and the bodice became open, with the torso now covered by a stiffened piece of fabric in the form of an inverted triangle, tapering into a narrow waist. This piece of fabric was known as a stomacher.
That's this one.
Which is, this is a sample of a stomach, yeah, of a stomacher.
I read it as stomach acre, but it's not a stomach acre. So, don't make your stomach hurt. But no, it's a stomacher. Yeah. So it would just be there. Yeah, to keep your stomach.
So it's here. So it's a decorated triangular panel that fills in the front opening of a woman's gown or bodice. And the stomacher may be boned as part of a corset, or may cover the triangular front of a corset. If simply decorated, the stomacher lies over the triangular front panel of the stays behind, being either stitched or pinned into place or held in place by the lacings of the gown's bodice. So, yeah, this is forming a very sort of flat surface on the female figure, and then it kind of uplifts the breasts to give them more of a kind of cleavage, and then you've got this bustle at the back. So this is what I'm saying. It's all about forming the sort of feminine and sexualizing, you know, the shape, like in the men, you know, this sort of elongated, thin, elegant look they had. So that's what it's all about.
So you can see
out and about. Sorry,
Alex, what did you say?
If you so on that long tail on the dress. So if you're out and about, do you bunch it back up in by the bum, and then you kind of, once you're inside, you let it trail? I'm just imagining the streets of London not being particularly clean.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually that would have belonged to somebody quite wealthy, so they would have. I mean, they had, didn't they have carriages then, or some sort of yeah, they did have carriages. So, but yeah, they would have got really dirty on the London streets. Yeah.
I also like,
and they would have lifted them up. They would have lifted them up with their hands as well.
I just noticed the if anybody has watched Harlots, which is all about sex workers in the 18th century and has Mollies in it as well. Samantha Morton's character, because Samantha Morton has got big boobs anyway, but they're practically up to her chin in her stomacher, so it's really flat and really emphasised. It's a really memorable part of the show. So yeah, just going back to this. So we've got another one.
Yeah.
Lovely.
So this is, yeah. So I think this is really interesting because of its flatness at the front. And again, you've got this sort of triangular piece here, again, emphasizing the bust line. And if you go to the next slide, Ray, you can see the back. So this is a robe volant, which marks a transition from the mantua of the late 17th and early 18th centuries to the robe à la française. So the dress style becomes ubiquitous into the 18th century with its unstructured silhouette. See the sort of bagginess and huge width of it, with its unbroken expanse of cloth, making it particularly appropriate for the display of large-scale patterning. So you, in a sense, you've got the fashion designers and the textile designers, you know, working together in the sense, you know, the clothes are showing off the textiles.
Yeah, Steffi has also just contributed on the chat, and she said, and they wore very high heels, chopins, which would have kept their hems from trailing along the ground. So there you go, bit of a note about the shoes. Next,
but it's not. I think what Alex was meaning was not just the hems, because of the early mantua. It's got the sort of bustle and train. I thought that's what he was meaning with the train.
Yeah, it looked like it may be bunched by the bum, or yeah, you said people might carry it.
No, they wouldn't have bunched it up by their bum. She would have carried it.
So if you're rich enough, I guess you have someone to carry it for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Great. So the next one is like what was underneath.
This is, yeah, so this is a pannier. So this would be, so this is obviously to extend the skirt out and to give it shape. Well, you can see like a crinoline, but it's not. So I mean, it's not because of the shape. You'll see later some slides of like court dresses where you've got these huge, massive skirts. Again, anyway.
Okay.
The size of the skirt obviously equals the wealth, really, because if you've got a large skirt, you're not going to be able to work in a second-hand market or on the field. So if you think of that in a sense, equalizing wealth, I think works. So going back to the pannier, so the pannier or side hoops are worn as a hooped underskirt. And like I was saying, it's like a crinoline, but these are elongated. So in this period, they were elongated and made this more of a sort of rectangular shape, and they become very, very large. And they were made with whalebone or wicker. And by the mid-18th century, women, again, the wealthy women in their fashionable dress, apparently took up 3 times more space, more physical space than men. Sorry, I find that really funny. But by sort of the end of the century, sort of 1780, the panniers were only worn for very formal or court occasions.
Mm-hmm. So we have got, I think there is testimony somewhere. I think I posted this on my Heads, Bodies, Legs Instagram, that when some of the Mollies were caught, it described how they were dressed, and I think some of them reference like high class fashions. There was also shepherdesses as well. I'm not sure the exact quote, but it kind of stayed in my head as well, like where did they get the dresses from? And that like it's quite likely that they could have been wearing these, which I think is just the most exciting part of the costumes, really, because they're so distinctive. I'll keep going with your slides.
Okay, this is, yeah, so you can see a pannier here underneath, and again you've got this same, open front, and then you can see the stomacher at the top underneath, and again I think it's pleated at the back. And then very pretty little sleeves, actually.
That's it.
Yeah. So this, yeah. So here you go. Here's a court dress. So this has got a huge pannier. Can you see how wide it is on either side of her elbows? And to walk in this dress, you would need to live in a palace, wouldn't you? Do you know what I mean? You need the width of the doors to get through, and you'll find that in history or architectural history and dress, that they work together, obviously, because because the people have to be able to walk and live in the interiors in what they're wearing. So yeah, this was vast.
Practicalities. Yeah.
So this is the back of it. I mean, it's outrageous.
Did we mention that it comes from Paris and that it comes from France as well?
Sorry, I'm not reading.
No. Wondered because I know we talked about it, didn't we?
Yeah. So in the 18th century, formal dress was very closely associated with Versailles in the French court, and it was universally described as the robe à la française. And like I'm saying, it has a fitted overdress which is open at the front and has a decorative bodice insert called a stomacher covering the corset and underskirt, and the petticoat showing under the splayed drapery of the overskirt. So if I haven't said, as well as having a pannier, you'd have had thick petticoats which were often quilted, you'd have had corsets. So there's a number of layers going on here to make this actual shape. So here you can see it's much lesser and it's becoming freer and less formal and a bit more sort of softer and frillier and a bit more natural. And I think this is just quite beautiful. I just like the way it's all sort of monotone, but works beautifully. so up to coming up to the end of the century, things really have started to change. So you saw the previous slide. It's got softer and more flowing, and now it really is changing and a lot softer and more natural. And now you're seeing the empire line here, which is just underneath the bust.
Mm-hmm.
And then the empire dresses. The empire dress owes its name, physical emancipation, popularity, and even sexiness to France. In this English example, the French style is slavishly followed in the gown's high waist and modest stripes. But for all its classicizing details and shape, the gown retains, it's a sort of call to France, basically. Yeah, but okay.
So we've got another image here.
Sorry, now, yeah. Okay, so
the Free West Indian Dominicans.
Yeah, so I've spent a lot of time trying to find imagery of particularly African and Caribbean people that wasn't of them as slaves or derogatory or characteristics. But I found this artist, and some of his work is actually at the Tate, so he's Italian, and these are people in Dominica. And so you can see 1770, this is quite similar to some of the clothing you'd seen earlier, but obviously much simpler and much cheaper. You can see it's the shape of it is not so refined. They would have had less petticoats, they wouldn't have had the panniers on, they would have had a simple corset, but it's quite similar. And I really love these clothing, and I really love this. I mean, it's very large. I think it's quite exaggerated, but the woman in the middle with her headscarf and huge hat on top. And again, this is similar to the period in Europe.
So yeah,
it's probably white for the heat, no?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but also white in Europe, they were wearing a lot of white dresses, so it would have been both.
So here we've got a poor woman. So
yeah,
you didn't think much about. I know you mentioned the difference between rich and the poor dress. Is there anything else?
So this is a woman who's selling clothes. It's by Paul Samby, who did a lot of colouring drawings, particularly of working, labouring people in the 18th century. Yeah, I mean, in a sense, you can see to the previous slide, she's wearing similar things of like loosely fitted, probably short jacket, full skirt, probably a petticoat, and then a huge wide apron on top. And she's wearing a red cloak. And from what I've read, that red cloaks were very common for English working class people to wear. I don't know why. It's something I need to look into. I don't know what the red stands for.
English compared to Scottish or Irish or European?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll say something about that later.
Yeah. Here.
Okay, this I included because it's just a beautiful picture of a woman of colour in the 18th century, and what I think is really so Dido, the woman of colour in the white dress, she was brought over as a freed slave as a young girl to Britain, and brought up with this family. There's a film called Belle, which was about her, which came out a few years ago. Anyway,
very famous thing, yeah.
Yeah, I just think it's a really lovely painting because she looks happy and strong. And what's really interesting as well is she's actually, this was painted in 1799, so she's actually wearing a much more fashionable dress than her white counterpart. Yeah, so I just wanted to include that.
Was she raised at Kenwood House? I can't remember.
I can't remember. She might have been. by, you know, a rich family, brought over by a man.
It is lovely.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I included this because it's in quite a lot of detail. It's a young girl selling ballads or choosing a ballad. Again, typical working class or poorer clothing. You can see her kind of corset over her skirt. Again, you know, so similar to the fashionable dresses I've been showing to you. You know, she's got a half skirt, hasn't she, at the back, and then she's showing the front skirt at the front. And white muslin around her neck here, and a scarf like the Dominican women underneath her straw hat.
I really like the fact that she's buying a ballad as well. The songs, because we're going to have more of a bit of street literature. I thought was good. Oops, sorry. This one?
Again, I included this just as a general painting with just lots of different characters in it, and again showing another member of the BAME community in the 18th century, which is important because there aren't many.
Lisa?
Okay, so this is Bonnie and Reed. They're two very famous women who go to sea, or biological women who then go to sea as men and become pirates. But most of the literature on them states that they went to sea to find husbands. Who knows? But I think differently. I don't see that you'd need to go and fight in the seas and become a pirate to find a husband. But yeah. But those are them, and I just love their dress. Again, you can see it's cheaper, you know, not so fine fitting and easy to wear clothing. And just to sort of know that they've got like red hankies or silk scarves, cotton or silk scarves on their heads and around their necks.
We've got another contribution from Steffi Walker saying, Anne Bonny, I love her, and Mary Reed.
Yeah.
Who was in
These are the pirates. Yeah.
The father brought her up as a boy, very transgressive. Yeah. I think, yeah, what I've read about it as well, that there's more, there's not as much evidence about lesbians in the 18th century, but there's quite a few female pirates and cross-dressing happening there. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of what they were called female husbands. So women who lived as men and then had relationships with women. And there are ballads written about them and lots of different stories, and it all gets, yeah. And they're often quite slanderous of these men, you know, saying how awful it was because the wife didn't know, like the stories we get now still some cases. Yeah, the wife didn't know until they went to bed on their wedding night and how awful it was and it was rape or whatever, you know, all this kind of slanderous. But yeah, there are a lot of what they called female husbands, and there are a lot of women who go to sea, and they're you know, who live their lives as men, should I say, and then there's those men who join the army and go off and fight in loads of different wars.
Yeah, you lent me a book about this well before this project, actually, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, which I still haven't got back.
Yeah, I know. I'll give you back soon.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
There's also, which we haven't included here. She was going to be, was the Chevalier d'Eon, who you might know about, who was, I mean, they came from a very wealthy background, and when you've got wealth and power around you, it's easier to live the life that you might like to, or, you know, and to have those choices are made available to you. But they were born male and then worked for the French royalty. It's a long story anyway, but in their later lives they then decided to trans, and as a and then as a trans woman, because she was worried about people finding out about her, she started gossip, and it was even betted in the London Stock Exchange, questioning whether, they were trying to question and try to guess her gender. So it was believed, they believed, so this was in England, she'd travelled from France to England, so it was believed that she was, anyway, so she was, do you understand? I'm getting myself tongue-tied here.
It's a long story, isn't it?
It's a long story, but anyway, she lived a very full life.
There's a famous painting by her
in her chosen gender. Sorry?
There's a famous painting I think everybody's talking about that's in the National Portrait.
Yeah, and Prince, and she was a brilliant fencer, and she taught fencing to the royalty and whoever, Garrick and places, people. Yeah.
Back to the slides, we have another of the sailors, I think.
Okay, yeah. So I've put in the sailors here because I'm really into they wore breeches, but their breeches, because they and other labouring men would have been very, very, very full. So very gathered at the waist and gathered at the knees. But sailors wore an additional pair of breeches, which they called slops, which was to keep the under breeches clean. Obviously, working on top of a big ship could become quite dirty, I suppose. Or they would wear aprons, and as did many other labouring men. And I'm just fascinated by it, because if as you can see in this picture, it looks like it's possibly a skirt. So is it slops or is it an apron? And if you could go on to the next one, Ray. And again here, this obviously is like a wraparound skirt. And then if you could go on to the next one, Ray. The person at the guy at the far right, again, looks, their slops, and the person in the middle looks like it's like one piece of cloth, i.e. like a skirt. So I'm just intrigued by this. And I will find out more before the project starts with the workshops. And thinking about it, if you were to wear two pairs of breeches, however wide they are, would be quite difficult to work in. So I'm wondering if they did wear kind of like a skirt over their breeches. Anyway, I just find that interesting. And, you know, and it's important to put, I'm putting up images of working people, because the Mollies were lower class, they were labouring men. So they could well have been sailors or soldiers or working on the markets or artisans. They weren't upper class and wealthy or aristocratic like the Macaronis. So that's just why I'm also showing these images, and also my own interest.
And the final one is people dressing for the masquerade.
I just really love this image. I was going to give some information on the masquerades, which we're not today. It's going to be dealt with in the next talk. But this is again by Rowlandson. And it's a group of people getting ready for a masquerade ball. And the woman in the centre apparently is dressing as a mad woman. So somebody with poor mental health, which I find quite interesting. And apparently that was quite topical to do, to dress up as that.
Okay.
This looks so much fun, my God.
Bring us all back to here. Great, thank you for that. I also wanted to, one thing that we didn't mention as well is, hello Judy, just cleaning your screen. Hello. You're Scottish, Lou, and we talked a little bit about regional differences, about them banning tartan. Can you tell us anything about that? Yeah.
Okay. So after Culloden, which was anyway in 1745, the British government brought in the Dress Act of 1746, which was banning the wear of Highland dress across the whole of Scotland. The English wished to eradicate the military threat of the Jacobite Highland clans and to eliminate the culturally separate identity of the Highland people. The Scottish people could be imprisoned for 6 months or a maximum of 7 years transportation for wearing their national cloth. It's outrageous. However, banning anything always lends it cult status. And when the ban was lifted in 1782, tartan became very fashionable. Prior to 1745, Mollies could have worn tartan, or thereafter, there was a mode to wear small samples of tartan cloth or braid attached to one's clothing, making quite a political statement. So again, it's going back to badges in a sense. They'd have them sort of tied to their lapels or buttonholes or whatever. And again, what I want to say, and which Alex highlighted, is, the subgroup of Mollies, they would have been a real mixture of people. And they wouldn't necessarily have come from London or Whitechapel, or, they could have been Scottish, it could have been Irish, it could have been from Yorkshire, wherever. Or, so that's again why I've brought it, I've got some more information, but, sort of, they weren't necessarily white Londoners.
Absolutely. But I love the tartan, because now
it
could be really punk as well.
That's the word in my head,
Talking of which, tattoos as well. We've talked a bit about adornments as well, like the badges. Like the sailors would have had tattoos?
So the sailors would have had tattoos. Apparently, British sailors started tattooing themselves from the 1700s, traveling with Captain Cook. So, and different markings. And like, I'm sure you all know the drama of Taboo. He, the leading guy, and his mate, are covered in tattoos. So there would have been that.
I haven't looked it up a lot, but I know there's quite a lot of records about it, because when they were transporting people to Australia, they recorded all the tattoos they have. So there is actually lots of descriptions of what people were getting. And also one of the common ones was like 5 dots if you were part of like a criminal group that you would have had in hands. Is there any other adornments that people would have? So we've had handkerchiefs and tattoos and...
So, all right, reminded me. So with the hankies, I'm really keen on that, is that they would have had Indian print hankies, which often would have been tie-dye to create, like these. So you get the red and white spotted hankies. And these were commonly worn by a lot of people. And that would have been done by tie-dye in India. And like I was saying, a lot of handkerchiefs, a huge amount of handkerchiefs, one of the most popular things of clothing to be stolen, were thieved. I've lost my thread.
Hankies.
So anyway, so sailors particularly, and labouring men and women, wore a lot of these red and other coloured, sort of spotted, and then Indian print like this handkerchiefs. And what I think is interesting is that, if you look back to the 1980s and gay men using these same coloured handkerchiefs as coding. So there's this kind of link. So the Mollies, I'm sure, because they were labouring men, would have worn these hankies as well, and bought them in the second-hand markets and so on. So there's a nice little link there. And then talking about badges, I've read about people in different poorhouses were made, if they would lose their place in the poorhouses if they didn't wear these badges, and they were cloth badges that they had to wear, I think, stitched onto their clothing, which had the initials, first have the initial of the charity. So they were kind of what's the word, branded.
We've touched on that a bit before as well, I think last week when we
then there's the beauty spots that people would wear, which were often called like patches, black patches that they would wear. So going to the Molly balls and the masquerades, people would have worn patches and beauty spots.
Good. This thank you so much, Lou. I'm realizing we've gone to 2. If we kind of round it up in like 5 or 10 minutes. Thank you so much. Really thorough. I feel like I understand 18th century dress a lot more than I did. There's so many interesting starting points, I think. Just briefly, we're going to be starting your workshops likely in January, and it will run for 12 weeks. And I think we'll be able, this has to be confirmed, but we'll probably be allowed like 12 participants. What are some of the things that we could possibly be doing during your workshop? Can we talk about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, well, initially, and I'm very keen that people, as well as coming away of learning different sewing and cutting techniques, is that they're going to learn about queer and social history of the local area and of the time, and of course of Mollies. So there's sort of information sharing there. And with that, I will arrange visits to the V&A and probably to one of the costumiers. I don't know. It might be the National. It could be whatever. But anyway, for them to see different examples of the actual clothing, and then of the textiles, because the V&A have got wonderful like sample books. Because and actually I didn't mention, you've got Spitalfields, which is in the same area where all the wonderful silk was woven by the Huguenots. So the area of what I'm saying is of our actual project is so suitable for the project of the Mollies, is what I'm saying. It ties up really neatly. So anyway, so there'll be trips out, sharing historical and social political information, and then I'm not quite certain how we're going to do this, but they will by the end of 12 weeks sort of made one piece of costume that then they can wear to the ball. And it will entail using sort of recycled cloth and bits and pieces, and adapting other bits of clothing to get a whole 18th century look. What I'm trying to say is that even in 12 weeks, which is a lovely long time, that isn't enough time to make a whole outfit, like a whole male suit or something. So we will be making and specializing on one piece, and then using contemporary pieces and adapting them quite quickly to make up the rest, to give a whole image.
So we should be able to sign up to all the courses from September, and we want to make sure as well as the project, because obviously the class sizes need to be limited, and especially because of post-COVID kind of protocol, that we're also going to like digitally share all the research and all the different facilitators projects, so that anybody can get involved. Because even if you don't end up in the 12 people who get to make a piece of costume, then there might be stuff that if we can digitize it, that you can kind of follow the chats, or try and make something at home, or even just have a bit of tartan or a handkerchief, or be involved in it in some way. Good. Has anybody got any questions for Lou before we finish? No? We good? All right. Oh, go on, John.
Yeah, it was just a quick one. I just sort of wondered about how did people sort of become aware of fashion in this sort of period? How was it sort of, how were the trendsetters and the trending without, pre-Instagram or whatever? How did they become, how did it sort of move out?
Well, you had kind of like small newspapers and pamphlets, a lot of written material, and that was the main way of communication. And there would have been like woodcuts, illustrations on those of people's dress. So that would be a way of sharing information.
We spoke a bit before about dolls as well in Sian's puppetry, that sometimes the dolls were also dressed as adult women, and so there became a thing about women copying dolls' dress and vice versa, which I thought was really interesting.
But sometimes dolls have been used as well as like little baby mannequins to advertise their fashion designs or dressmaking skills. They're used in that way.
Nice. Anybody else? Stuart, did you want to say something?
Just wanted to say how excellent that was. I felt like the costume sort of opened up a lot around just the whole project for me, in terms of that really important reminder that this isn't just a group of people from London who went to their local spa, and actually that you know, they could have come from absolutely anywhere, very likely to. And also just struck by this convent, like, you know, a bit like John was saying about when they would have made the costumes and how they got the material, who helped them, where they got the skills to make them, you know, how they collaborated on the creation of the costume, the Molly costumes. I just found that that's just really, because they wouldn't have just appeared like that. So I just find that, as you know, listening to today's sort of talk, I've just been imagining it, and yeah, it's just really good. So thank you.
Thank you. And John, I just want to say, I'm not up on the history of fashion magazines or how that was, people got that information, so I can't really answer that. But what I will share with you is this book, which is Harris's List, which was produced from sort of the latter part of the 18th century. This obviously is a modern copy, but this is full of descriptions of sex workers. So that's how, for example, people got information on an appropriate sex worker to.
So for anybody who doesn't know, Harris's List was a guy who wrote like a yearly guide, like a time-out guide to the sex workers of London, which is fascinating in itself. Yeah. Good. And also, just one of the things when we talk about, like, when me and Lou went to a talk about 18th century decoration and furniture, and one of the images that they were showing was le toilette, and this idea that how long people would spend getting dressed and getting their hair done would be like 5 or 6 hours. You know, it was a big process, and you'd invite your friends round. And I just really like that as a, you know, in the last image of the masquerade as well, that was a really big social part of it, was getting dressed up with your mate.
But what was really interesting with that talk that we went to, Ray, was, so I think it was earlier, so it's sort of late 1600s. So up until then, women wouldn't have allowed other women to be able to socialise wouldn't be able to socialise together. And sometimes, although this does sound like male-written history, I don't know, but that women apparently would lie, pretend that they were pregnant, so that their friends were allowed to come and visit them in their bedrooms. So, and these, I mean, again, these were wealthy women, so they would have very large rooms. And so in some of the paintings you see the women lying in bed, and then there's all her friends sitting around in chairs. So I thought that was just interesting about space. And
there's also something interesting about just like cultures of people getting being intimate together in the sense of like the midwifery kind of conversation within the lying in or the Mollies birthing.
Yeah, exactly.
It would also be like kind of a same-sex environment as well, and have the role play of that, and the role play of like intimacy of women getting together was kind of replicated by the Mollies. I'm going to round it up because we're over an hour. Okay, but lovely to see everybody, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks' time, and we'll be talking to Milu Stella, who's an amazing embroidery artist, and she's Italian, and she's going to be talking to us about the masquerade and the English masquerade and the influences of Europeans on the masquerade. I will send you the proper title and a Zoom link for that very soon. So lovely to see you all. Okay, thanks, Lou.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Lou, my mic's open. Thank you so much.
Thank you
very much, Lou. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ray.